Hello, my dear. How are you today?
I am doing well, and welcome to the channel. This is Azurite 22 coming to you as always to bring your intuition to the fore, to bring to bring you more into your life. My goodness, I'm so excited. I'm losing my voice, but I'm here today with the wonderful Jennifer Hill, Ph.D., and she's going to talk to us about something that I've been talking about a lot, tweeting about a lot: shadow work. And we are going to do an explanation and a deciphering because there is so much stuff out there online that can be a little dangerous, can be a little bit too proactive and aggressive, depending upon where you are in your journey. And we're going to dive right into that. But I want to introduce everyone here to Jennifer Hill, and just have to say a few things. We're going to put a lot of things into the description box so that you can grab a lot of information. We're going to put her website, we're going to put her Reddit, we're going to put her Twitter so that you can connect with her on her blog, because she has amazing content on her blog. Please tell me what your website is again, Jen.
It is jenniferhillphd.com.
Okay. And you're thinking, why exactly am I having somebody talk about all this stuff already? Because she's this important. She has so much to offer. Now, excuse me while I read. I'm going to be looking down, so excuse me. I'll try and make eye contact. Dr. Jennifer Hill is here to help you get acquainted with your shadow. She holds a doctorate in psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, now Sophia University, in Palo Alto, California. Her dissertation was on meaningful coincidence, synchronicity in grief. She is a former adjunct professor of psychology at St. Leo University, but now writes full-time. In 2011, she presented her research on grief at Oxford University in England. She is a priestess working in a Celtic neo-pagan tradition and was ordained by the Church of the Sacred Garden in 2004. In 2008, she completed 200 hours of Kundalini Yoga teacher training and has been guiding individuals and groups in meditation, spiritual development, and ritual for 16 years. Okay? Longer than some people have been alive. So I think that her background is one not to disregard at all. Why? Because for me, and this is one of the main reasons why I wanted her to speak with us, speak with me too, I'm listening as well. She brings both the academic side as well as the spiritual side. And we always talk about intuition on this channel. Intuition plays a great deal in shadow work. And we did cull some questions from various places online, including Reddit and Twitter and Facebook, as well as YouTube. And here are some of the things. And thank you all for your responses and for sharing these great questions. And we're going to dive right in with the very first one from Danielle, which is more of a statement. She says, I know the concept and idea of shadow work, but I don't know how to start. So anything like that would be great. What do you say, Jen? I'm getting and Jen's all mixed up.
Oh, it's okay. The best place to start is in two places, actually. The first thing that you want to do is start building your skill in what's called active imagination. That's the term that I use. That's the psychology term for it. But the spiritual term for that is path working or journeying or astral projection. The more skill you have in that imaginative capacity, the more able you will be to start to connect to your source of inner guidance, connect with your higher self, because that is the energy that is going to lead you through the shadow. You don't really want to go through shadow work alone, and that inner source of wisdom and unconditional love will really help you go through the process safely. The second place that you want to start focusing your attention is dealing with the inner critic first. the inner critic will try to derail your shadow work process simply because of its criticism. It weaponizes shame, and shame is what creates shadow in the first place. So if you haven't dealt with the inner critic yet, it's very difficult to truly get acquainted with your own shadow, and it's similarly difficult to stay connected to your higher self. This is a force to be reckoned with, as it were, that needs attention at the very beginning. This is especially true for people who have been scapegoated in their family systems.
Can you talk more about scapegoating? What exactly do you mean by scapegoating?
What I mean by scapegoating is oftentimes in a family system, someone will unconsciously receive the role from their caregivers, their parents, their other family members, to take the garbage that's in the family. So the shadow is projected by all the other family members onto the scapegoated individual in that system. And that can create a lot of false beliefs about the self, and it definitely creates a mega inner critic, because the scapegoated individual basically has to live their life from the get-go trying to defend against that ongoing onslaught of projection. So that's what I mean by scapegoat. And that can actually, it's
generational stuff as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're getting from under your own personal that you came in with from earlier in your life or past lives, if you go that way, if you believe that way, as well as the generational, and God forbid, you have multi-ethnicities within your family. Now you have all these shadows or garbage from all of this to work through.
Yeah. And for someone who's been scapegoated, a lot of what they may think is in their own personal shadow is actually not theirs at all. It's usually the shadow material of the people who projected that on them in the first place. And so for scapegoated individuals, I actually recommend starting with looking for the good in you, because that's probably more in shadow than any of the bad. Scapegoated individuals know all the ways that they're bad. And they don't know the ways that they're good. So that's really the best place to start for people who have experienced that, which I think actually is fairly common in the witchcraft and spiritual communities. I think we're drawn to those paths because we're outsiders and we're looking for a path that suits us. So.
Okay. And this brings me to that point you spoke of in a couple of tweets, a golden shadow. Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
This is my favorite part of shadow work. So people often believe that shadow work is about looking for all the negative and quote toxic behaviors or toxic beliefs and attitudes that are held inside the psyche. And while that's certainly part of it, your shadow also has an awful lot of gold in it. And what the gold is all of your potential, all of your natural capacity and talent and skill that may have been placed into your unconscious mind and never developed for whatever reason. Often this happens, let's say your mother liked to sing a lot when you were growing up. Let's say she was even successful at it. Maybe she was the lead in the choir, or maybe she even had a career in music. You too might have skill and talent in singing, but maybe you don't ever develop that because you don't feel you can live up to her example, or she criticizes the way you sound, or there are many different reasons why we put the best parts of ourselves into shadow. But
and overshining them is another thing. We don't want to overshine them. Do better.
Right. And so that gets put away and never dealt with, even though for a lot of people, their very soul needs that to be brought out of the shadow and then actualized in their day-to-day life in order to be whole and complete human beings. So
Okay. So shadow work is, and I'm going to summarize it with something that you said. Shadow work basically is finding and getting your soul back, soul retrieval, as you,
Yes.
all of the parts of you from many generations ago, and wading through all of that to find the real you that has no encumbrances.
Correct. Yeah, it's a path towards wholeness. In my mind, shadow work is the ultimate spirituality because it brings you to your whole complete self. It's a beautiful practice, but it has to be done carefully and in stages.
Right.
So,
yeah, I love that. All right, so I think that's a very good overall. And first question, we have 5 from the next person, and this is some really good name from Reddit. What are some different methods for doing shadow work?
that's a really great question, and that's the reason I'm writing the book on this topic. So, shadow work, first of all, has 3 main phases. After you've done the preliminary work of connecting with your imaginative faculties to your higher self and your spirit guide, and you've dealt with the scapegoating issues, if there are any, and the inner critic, even if there aren't, you then move into what I call the discovery phase. This is full of techniques where you're basically uncovering on an intellectual level the shadow issues that you personally need to deal with. This can be things like looking at your triggers, dealing with the projective process, and doing dream work, and even divination. I have an entire chapter on using tarot to help you discover your shadow.
My
so
favorite.
Yeah, it's really fun. That's the first phase. The second phase is about transforming what you found in the discovery phase. This gets into things like body work, lots and lots of ritual work, and dealing with what I call the tension, well, not I call, Jung called the tension of the opposites. So we have a very binary way of looking at the world. This is good and this is bad, and that's just the way it is. And we have these opposing forces in our psyche that we put into shadow because they're unacceptable on some level to somebody out in society. The tension of the opposites is learning how to sit with the fact that 2 things can be true at once, and waiting until basically a third quality emerges from the extremes. And that is usually a balance point between them. And often it's a synthesis between them. So that's all about the second phase. And then the third phase is about integration of the shadow material that you have been working with and working to transform. And integration is about bringing the wisdom that you've gained from the process into your daily life and truly living it. So if you use shadow work, for instance, to work through problems in relationships, the wisdom that you get from that process, you would then integrate by making changes in the way you do relationship.
All across the board.
Right. And then also the more you can embody, and I mean physically really carry these energies in your body, the more integrated the shadow becomes. So I have chapters upon chapters of, again, rituals, body work practices, and a lot of arts-based creative expressions that you can use to actualize what you learn from your spirit guide in the shadow work process. So,
and I love that, the art space, get your hands dirty, if you will. So there are 2 things that you said that, well, one thing that I really, really wanted to go back to, which was triggers, things that trigger you. Yes. If you can talk a little bit more about that, because we're triggered by lots of things all the time. I mean, our boss triggers us, our children trigger us up. The dog who barked unnecessarily at 1 a.m, that triggers us. What do you mean?
Mm-hmm. So this part of the practice is, I recommend actually keeping a trigger log, where you have the date, a column for the date and the time and the event that happened, and you just write down what triggered you, what your emotional state was, what feelings came up in that triggering process, what your knee-jerk reaction urge to do about the situation is, and then start to look for patterns, because your triggers are like flashing neon signs to your shadow stuff. And this is where shadow work, I think, can get a little squirmy for some people, because often when we're triggered, we feel very righteous. We feel, that person did this to me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But it likely is part of your shadow when you're triggered, just maybe not in the exact same way. This is where the journaling process really does come into play, because you're able to see that maybe I don't behave exactly the way that person who triggered me does, but I probably behave in a way that's similar, but just in a different context. So,
or maybe you recently realized that you did that and you're beginning to change, but there's still a little bit of a soft spot there, and there's still, soreness, if you will.
Oh, exactly.
I totally get that. And there was the second thing. Now I remembered it. So when you say work it out of your body, do body work. Years and years ago, I remember I was working with a spiritual person, and they had me do anger therapy, and literally in an open space with very soft surfaces, they had me knocking huge body pillows, small pillows, pillows with little soft arms all over the place. And I remember that went on for about 40 minutes. But afterwards, yes, I was exhausted, but there was such a weight lifted off of me. Is
yes
that what you're talking about, that type and others?
Big time, yes. So when we often put our emotional states and our feelings into shadow, especially when those states come up in a context where it's not appropriate to really deal with whatever's come up. You're like, oh, I have to deal with that later because I'm at work or whatever. What
or
happens,
it's an authority figure or someone you do not feel you can express that to. Yes.
Exactly that thing. Yes. So what happens there, I'm going to get real scientific now. What happens there is, so your neurons in your brain, and they actually go down into your digestive system and into the musculature of your body. They get entrained in patterns, basically, and those patterns begin to repeat, and the more they repeat, the stronger those patterns become. And so this is a very physical thing, and often we put that emotional stuff into different places in the actual trunk of our body. Particularly anger, I think, likes to hang out in the belly and in the upper chest. Sadness and grief can hit the lungs, but often we store a lot of stuff in the big muscles of our body. So our thigh muscles, our hips, and doing body work in this way, what you just described, when you release that energy, you're truly releasing it from your body, and you're giving your brain a chance to use its natural plasticity, which means the ability to change,
to be flexible,
to rewire, right, to totally rewire your brain. So this is why body work is such a strong force for both the transformation of shadow material, but also for the integration of what you learned, because you literally are integrating the new learning in your neural pathways.
So that is also part of what neuro-linguistic programming is all about for those who study. NLP, love that stuff. You know, the stuff that Tony Robbins is really popular for.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a big, huge piece, because I don't think a lot of people associate that body work with shadow work. And that's why a book like yours, what is the name of your book that you're writing?
Shadow Work for the Soul.
Right. That is why shadow work for the soul is so important, because she is coming from, and of course, I didn't turn my phone off.
Okay. Mercury.
This is Mercury retrograde. I didn't even think about it. But this is why those popular things that we see online are not all that they could be, and it doesn't encompass all of shadow work, because as you move through it, as you go through a journey, because it's not a journey of a couple of weeks or a couple of months, it's a year-long, decade-long, centuries-long. We want to think about that. Definitely lifelong, across lifetimes, if you also believe in that way. And guess what? We're going back to our question, second question from some really good name on Reddit. What types of questions should I be asking myself or exploring? But you know what? I like number 5, where she says, what tips do you have for integration? I think that is very important.
Well, it's basically what I've said already. It's about incorporating, your shadow material that you have uncovered and transformed into your daily life in a truly lived experience kind of a way. Your behavior changes because you learn how to begin making choices for your life, even simple ones like, can I have a cookie for breakfast? You learn, you learn to actually consult with your higher self and the various shadow figures that live in your shadow before making those choices, so that you're making a fully rounded choice and not just your ego's desire. Because the other part of shadow work that's interesting is the ego is not unconscious, it's not in shadow, but it has a whole set of problems of its own that have to be dealt with. And it likes to think that it's the only entity inside the mind, and it simply isn't.
It is number 1. That's what it thinks.
It thinks that, yeah. And when it finally lets go of that position and learns to start dialoguing internally with the higher self and the shadow figures, life becomes smoother and better, because you're no longer trying to force your entire psyche to do things that it doesn't want to do. So it's a strong balancing force. So that's a big part of integration. Again, making shadow material that has been transformed physical in the world somehow. I have many exercises in the book where you ritualize and make sacred what you have learned. So, for instance, I had a weird dream once. I dreamt I was a young man participating in the Greek Orthodox religious festival of Epiphany. And I dreamt that I dove into the frigid water in January and caught the cross that had been thrown in and came up triumphant. And I thought, that's a weird dream, Jen. So I worked it, and I went through the shadow work process with it. And at the end, I integrated it by ritualizing, and I use the word concretizing. This is like making something concrete, taking something that has come from the spirit realm and putting it in the physical world. So what I did is I sculpted a Greek cross, and I put that on my altar. And I interacted with that for months after the fact. So those are the kinds of things that you can do to integrate the shadow material that you uncover and transform. Artwork is another huge one. I highly recommend people start to dive into even the simplest creative expression. This is where you got to get the ego out of the way. So let's say you have a dream or you have a shadow work experience that you really need to concretize. Excuse me. And you sit down with just a piece of paper and some crayons, and you want to just express this by line and color. You're not worried about form or anything. The ego can get involved and be like, well, that's not very good artwork. That's not the point.
You should be using colored pencils. In fact, you should be using an artist's easel. Yes.
Right. And nobody's ever going to like to see this, or it's ugly. And then you're basically back in the shadow work process and dealing with the inner critic all over again. But when you can use art-based approaches to really integrate the material, every time you do this, it's also a physical act because you're moving when you color or paint or sculpt or even dance. Dance is one of my favorite because dance is something that is just for you alone and you can do in private and nobody will ever see it. So anything you can do to concretize it, make it physical and integrate it into your daily life in a lived way is a great way.
And then I remember, because just in case you didn't know and don't follow us on Instagram or Twitter, this is like take 2 of this whole thing because we filmed this during Mercury retrograde.
We did.
One of the things that we talked about before that I wanted to make sure we mention here now is one of the things that you can do in the moment to help with integration is just pulling on that pneumogastric nerve, just pulling in your stomach sharply to try and have your stomach hit the back of your spine, basically pull it into your spine, and that stops the emotions from just free flowing all over you. And it's like you can actually, like, all of a sudden the lights go on, and that's because the emotions flood your system and cloud your thinking. So pulling on the pneumogastric nerve 2 or 3 times wherever you are, you can do that in private, because I know before we talked about getting out of the situation that triggers you and going someplace where you can be alone and calm yourself, put some water on your face, whatever you need to do to bring yourself back into calmness or balance. But in the moment, you can do that wherever you are. And generally speaking, nobody sees that you're pulling in your stomach. So it's something that is, unnoticeable by most. And that is just one of the ways to integrate new behavior into what you used to do. And another thought that we had before that we talked about was, don't move, just stop for a second. If you have to say, let me get back to you on that, or let me sleep on that, or do you mind if I review that a little further? All of these quote unquote delaying tactics. This way you don't give in to what you used to do, because so many times it's because we're so used to, just give it to me. No, don't get overwhelmed. Don't just fall into it. Stop. And you stopping and saying, let me think about that. That changes the neural processes. It really does, because your whole body is like, what is this? Does not compute. And all of a sudden it gives you freedom because your body doesn't know which way to go now. You are telling your body what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So that's another really great, maybe not easy method of integration, but it is the active part of going against the tide of what we used to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that part I love. I'm very much into that part of it myself, and I'm not very proud to say that, but it is what it is. We all have stuff. We all have stuff.
We absolutely all have stuff, and the more of us that recognize that soon, the better.
We will have a much better world. Jen, thank you so much for this interview. I love this topic. We have got to try and do this again because
we will.
there are more questions. I'd love to get more into what you do in the book, you know, as you get further, because how far in are you on this book?
Oh, I've got 350 some odd pages at this point, and I just went down another research rabbit hole. So,
Wow, 357 pages written already.
yeah,
This
give or take.
is a Bible of shadow work for the soul, integrating, like I said, the academic with the spiritual, because Jenn is also a practicing, shall I say that word? She's a practicing,
Sure.
She's a practicing witch. That's,
Yeah.
and we all come to this path for one reason or another. It stems from our childhood, from our upbringing. And these are the things that shape us. It gives us the why we're doing this, the mission statement of our lives. And we usually can't uncover these things without doing this shadow work or some form of it. So Jenn has, I've got all this stuff hanging around right here, has a fabulous, this way, new moon ritual that will go to five people who comment down below first. So the first 5 who comment will get this, which is a 2-pager, emailed to them. Okay. So again, thank you, Jenn. Jennifer Ph.D. Her information will be below. I will put her bio below and everything. If you have questions, please ask. I appreciate your time, your energy, your love, your wisdom. Thank you again for being with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoy talking to you, and it's lovely. I can't wait to come back. Yeah. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh yes, subscribe, like, share with everybody. Bye-bye.